Welcome to the Evolve Move Play podcast. I'm your host, Rafe Kelley. At Evolve Move Play, our aim is to help you cultivate a more meaningful life and a more heroic self by reconnecting deeply to movement, mindfulness, nature, and community practices. This podcast was created to bring the best and brightest minds in all of these subjects together to better understand how we can create an empowering and sustainable ecology of practices for personal growth. If you're interested in being part of this ongoing conversation, the best way you can support us and get involved is by joining our Podcast Plus membership. By joining, you will get backstage access to our live podcast airing once a month, as well as a private question and answer session with me and our guests after the show. On top of that, you'll get access to our thriving online community where you can continue these deeper discussions with people all over the world who are just as passionate and curious about these topics as you. More details about the membership, as well as the link to get signed up, are in the description below. And whether you can join, be sure to like, share, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so that you can be notified every Monday when our episodes drop. Thanks so much for your support, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Evolve Move Play podcast. So this week, my guest is Jason C. Brown. Now before I get into who Jason C. Brown is and why you should be excited about him, I do have to remind you guys that we are selling the autumn retreat right now. Likely by the time you guys see this, it might be sold out, but there's a small chance that you can jump in and get your shot if you sign up today. So don't miss out. Get yourself in line for one of our retreats. If not the autumn retreat, then one of our upcoming retreats. Now, on to Jason. Jason is the guy who actually hosted the first ever Evolve Move Play cert. He's a really thoughtful, really interesting guy. He's been coaching kettlebell certs for Equinox, one of the largest gym brands in the world, for something like 20 plus years. But he's much more than a kettlebell instructor. He's also a Jujitiero who's been doing Jiu-Jitsu for many years and a kind of just amazing geek about physical culture. It was Jason who introduced me to Mike Fitch, for instance, and he introduced me to Margaret Stryker, who's become a huge influence in the way I think about natural movement, and many other really interesting topics. Jason has a library around movement that's unlike anybody else that I've met. And this is a really wonderful and fun conversation. We hadn't talked to each other in quite a while. So it's a deep dive into really what physical culture can be and what it can mean to people, how it can impact us as a community, how we can understand better our own motivations and how to achieve what we're looking for in physical culture, and even how it impacts us in developing a community and being parents. So I think you guys will love Jason. I think you're guys are going to want to see him on the podcast again. So make sure to stay tuned and watch the rest of my episode with Jason and comment and let us know what you'd like us to talk about. So without further ado, Jason C. Brown. Thank you.
So, Jason, it's been a really long time.
Rafe, thank you for having me.
Yeah,
I'm excited.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's been too long.
Yeah. I believe you hosted the first ever Evolve Move Play workshop.
I was the first host ever.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And I couldn't even participate because like the morning of or the morning before, I hurt my neck at a stupid 6 a.m. jujitsu class.
Yeah. And you've never been able to come since.
No, I know.
Every time I came to Philly, you were on your out teaching on your own.
Yes. But now I don't know if this is a blessing or a curse, Rafe, but the COVID has killed the traveling kettlebell circus.
Okay.
That was my business. So I don't necessarily mind not traveling every weekend. And I think we'll open up some more educational opportunities for me to study as opposed to, teaching people how to swing kettlebells every weekend.
That'd be cool.
That was getting a little bit old anyways,
Yeah.
I have other things to pursue.
Well, that's the thing about you. And I always find it difficult when people ask me at the beginning of a podcast, like, tell the audience your life story and why they should care that I'm talking to you. I find that to be a difficult entry to start with.
It's true.
But I figure we should background you a little bit. And one of the things that I find interesting about you is, so you've been in the fitness game for a really long time. And you were one of the early adopters of kettlebells, and you were one of Steve Maxwell's students, and you kind of found a niche there as a kettlebell guy that's been pretty successful for you, but you've always had this broader perspective that you were interested in. I remember, I was quite young coming up when I came to visit you, and I remember just looking at your library and the amount of fitness history, movement history, everything that you had that was going on in the back of your brain there was
Right.
pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't do a very good job of sharing it. It's actually, Rafe, it's hilarious because I brought this in case we want to discuss this in the terms of natural movement and the history of natural movement and all that goodness as well. But yeah, unfortunately, like you said, the kettlebell stuff really took off. I thought it would die at some point, but it's hard to, as a professional, I'm sure you understand this. I've always wanted to go in different directions as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like my play-based workshops, they never did as well as the kettlebell workshops.
Yeah.
The natural movement workshops never did as well as the kettlebell workshops. And when I'm a father of 3, you're a father of 2, correct?
3. I've got 3 as well.
3 now. Okay.
Yeah.
It's sometimes you have to do, this is going to sound really materialistic, but it's like, I'm going to make this much this weekend, or I could make this much per weekend. I guess I'll do kettlebells and make this much, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I still love presenting and working with people in person on that subject matter, but I don't have the heart to post kettlebell workouts online anymore. I'll leave that to the 20-year-old beautiful people that are, abs and 6-packs and beautiful glutes and everything else like that. And I'll plant my Swiss chart and talk about natural movement with Rafe in the backyard.
Sounds good. Well, you can always rely on the jawline, right? You've got that.
Thank you. I
Go to the talking head. You don't have to have abs to be a talking head.
I guess that's true. Yeah, that's my nice German and Slavic combination.
So you've been doing kettlebells for what, like 18 years?
No, longer. Well, I'm sure your timeline gets blurry too, Rafe, right?
Yeah.
It gets blurry. Like, I don't know when Steve had those first.
You showed me
those steel ball bearing kettlebells, and I can send you a picture, Rafe, if you want to include it in any of the material. But I don't know exactly when Steve had those created. Mm-hmm. But those were my first exposure. But it had to be 2000, 2001.
Wow, so 20 years on kettlebells. So I can see why you're a little fatigued. So do you still swing the kettlebell around on a weekly basis, or are you just not?
I do 100 swings per day.
100 swings per day.
Yeah, I have a real simple movement practice, if you want to call it that, physical practice. And it's I wake up 3 miles, fast it with the shepherds. That's
a walk or a run?
Walk. Yeah, okay. I don't run. I find so I walk. I got this from Thoreau, or maybe it was Emerson, but I really, really love it, and it resonated with me quite well. He said he walked to get ideas out of his head instead of into his head, and I find running is too intense for me to focus.
Yeah,
maybe not focus is the wrong word, but for stuff to spontaneously pop out of my head, it has to be a walk for me. Now, my walk is pretty brisk. My wife complains all the time that I walk too quickly, and I actually walk in front of her.
Yeah.
But I like walking. I prefer walking because I think it's better for my mental clarity and creativity to get those ideas to come out. Running is a little bit too intense. And if I'm going to run, to be honest, I'm not going to do a 3-mile run. I'm going to do 40 yards.
Sprints. Yeah.
Yeah, sprints.
For sure. I'm a big fan of sprints as well.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, I find, I think we're about similar body size. And I find that for me as an explosive athlete who's taking a lot of pounding on my feet and ankles from the parkour, that adding another like long cycle. I mean, maybe I could adapt myself with a proper training cycle. I did the MAF style training, the Max Aerobic Fitness from Phil Maffetone.
Yes. That's the only style I would do as well.
Yeah.
Right. His heart rate materials is superior in my opinion.
Yeah. I did that for like 3 months, one fall, like 3 years ago. And I did feel like it really actually helped me, that it was very beneficial to me. But
with your performance or with recovery or?
Recovery.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't going to make me faster or more powerful, but it just made me better able to handle the training that I wanted to do.
I understand. Yeah.
So
maybe this winter I'll be able to do that again. But I've been doing the bike recently to kind of achieve the same effect. But I actually irritated my Achilles tendon from biking too much, which is like, didn't
blame it on the
expect
bike,
that one.
Rafe. Don't blame it on the parkour or the tree running.
Well, the parkour is something my body's very adapted to.
Right.
But I was just listening to this interview with Ebony Rio. Todd Hargrove interviewed her, and she was talking about how specifically like biking, if you do a lot of it and you're not prepared for it, can irritate the paratendon body because you're not getting enough tensile loading through the Achilles, but it's getting this this repeated dorsiflexion stretch that doesn't really have the same characteristics of the kind of running you do. I don't completely understand the mechanism, but I was like, oh, that sounds like what might be happening to me.
It's a pretty reasonable idea.
Yeah, it's an interesting interview. Yeah, I think you'd enjoy it.
I find biking hurts my hips, to be honest.
Interesting.
It's so weird.
I mean, it's a very strange movement, right? It's really not natural for us.
Right.
But it's very low impact, which is nice
It's
when
true.
you're a parkour athlete on top of wanting to achieve your general fitness stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so you do a 3-mile walk. And
3-mile walk, and then I come home, and you've been in my backyard, so you know
Yeah.
my setup. I have like a 12-foot rogue rack in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
Gymnastics rings, free weights, that type of stuff, kettlebells, CMBs. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what CMBs are.
I'm not.
CMBs are like I can send you a photo of these as well. So Rogue has them, and also Sorenex has them. The Sorenex version is called CMB, Center Mass Bell.
Okay.
The Sorenex version is Donnie Thompson's version, and he calls them fat bells.
Okay.
So they're literally a circle, but instead of having the extended hand like a kettlebell would have on the outside, the handle is on the inside.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. I've seen.
And I find them super gentle on the joints. I'm pretty old. I'm getting pretty up there in age and stuff. And so I do 100 swings. I do 100 standing up in base or technical stand-ups, depending on what Jujitsu school come from, right? And I do 10 pull-ups. That's it. And those are the minimum. 3-mile walk, those, and then I'm done. And then everything else is just additional play.
Yeah. And that's just to maintain a baseline of fitness.
That's just to maintain a baseline. Yeah, because I still do teach kettlebell, so I need to, sharpen that edge.
Yeah. You got to keep the confidence level up.
It's true.
And then do you play with any new sort of kettlebell patterns, juggling, flows, any of that stuff?
I don't. If I'm going to play with any new stuff, it's going to be with a different tool. Just because, as we spoke earlier, I've been doing this for 20 years. So it's hard for me to be like, today I'm going to do this. Right. So I've recently fell in love with the ropes that David Weck promotes.
Yeah.
Right. The RMT ropes and slush ropes. There's a really cool YouTube channel, and a gentleman, he calls it Way of the Rope, which is pretty cool. And he's out in nature doing all those things. If I'm going to play with a new pattern like that, it's going to be with a different tool as well. So
interesting. So what do you feel like is the benefit of the ropes? Like I've seen a lot of people, like Yuri Marmerstein's gotten into him, Timothy Sheaf in the parkour community, and
it goes back to our previous. You're skeptical. It's good that you're skeptical, because I was skeptical as well, Rafe.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what we were just discussing. It's a really low intensity, low impact. I don't want to say low intensity. You could probably cook it up if you wanted to, but I can get my heart rate almost to the Phil Maffetone level, right?
Yeah.
Zero impact on my joints.
Yeah.
You can do it artistically. You can get all these beautiful little patterns. You get the supination, the internal rotation, the external rotation. You can do locomotive patterns. You can do all these little cool things without stressing the joints too much. I can literally do it right next to my garage and get a nice little heart rate response, active recovery response. And, to be honest, I don't move as artistically as you, Rafe, but this makes me feel a little bit artistic. It makes me feel a little bit, just a little bit. There's a little bit of warrior built into it. There's a little bit of, overhand rights and uppercuts and that stuff. You can cook in lunge patterns, lateral lunge patterns. I've seen people doing forward rolls with them. It's pretty but I understand your skepticism. It's if you're looking for a really tough workout, that may not be it. But if you're looking for something that's maybe a little bit lower intensity, but still has a nice little poetic edge to it, I think you would like them.
I've been thinking about this idea of the Pareto distribution of movement tasks. So, right,
Yes.
I'm a movement generalist. So I'm, over the last week, I went in and taught an MMA class and then stayed afterwards and sparred for a couple of rounds, with a couple of guys who have fights coming up. Right. So I was helping them prepare for fights. And then I went out and jumped around in the trees. I run sprints recently. I've done some weightlifting recently, done some acrobatics, right? I'm doing all this stuff.
Yes.
And, there's the whole movement culture thing that's come up. And
yeah,
I was really into it. And then I become pretty jaded about what a lot of it is.
Me too.
Because the idea of the generalist is really powerful. And it's like obviously true that human beings are incredibly diverse movers. But what I'm seeing is that people aren't going to the disciplines that sort of that matter most, I would say, and selecting the most valuable components of them. They're actually going in and picking out the least valuable components because those are the ones at which they can compete. So rather than being a generalist, you're just a specialist at all of the cast off pieces of other disciplines.
Rafe, that's hilarious that you're talking about that because I was thinking that same exact thing in my diet. They're specialists.
Yeah.
These people that are movement, exactly. They are specialists. They specialize in handstands.
Yeah.
Or ring work. And it's like, I'll just give you a personal story. I was training, he's older than me and I'm 49, 49 jujitsu player, 49-year-old jujitsu player, high stress job, financial guy in Center City, Philadelphia. He hired a movement coach.
Yeah.
Rafe, 3 to 5 hours per day of wrist prep, shoulder prep, handstand prep. I'm like, this isn't, he lasted about 2 weeks. He's like, I can't do this.
That's absurd.
It's absurd. But he drank the Kool-Aid for a little bit until he actually hired a coach. And then he realized this is not the type of stuff I'm looking for. Right.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it's a specialist.
Yeah. So, I mean, what really kind of, this is why this is coming up because of the ropes, but
the ropes. Okay.
I really started sort of like thinking about this when everyone got into punching tennis balls.
Oh yeah.
Right. And what I realized was that like,
I've never done that, Rafe, by the way.
There we go. It's one check in your favor right there.
Right. I do like the training balls from Fighting Monkeys.
I like the training balls as well.
Yeah.
We can talk about those and why they're maybe like the rope, right? Where with the right utilization, they can be a good tool, but we shouldn't fall in love with the tool as opposed to the purpose that we put it to.
Right.
So
well said.
The problem is that a boxer might hit tennis balls as a way to refine a small characteristic, right? They know that 90% of the benefit, 80% of the benefit of their training comes from sparring and hitting the heavy bag, all right, and pad work. But here's the thing, like Firas Zahabi recently said, like, you don't need to do pad work even. Like if you go back to George Foreman, Sugar Ray Robinson, Roberto Duran, Tommy Hearns, Thomas Hagler, like Marvin Hagler, none of these guys trained on pads. That's like something that was basically invented in the 90s. And now everyone does it. But somehow the best boxers that have probably ever lived, walked the planet, didn't need this tool. So it's like, do you really need this tool? If you're coming over to become a generalist, can you afford to adopt a tool that isn't in the top? It isn't that the Pareto idea is there's 20% of something that gives you 80% of the benefit.
Correct.
Well, what's the 20% of boxing that gives you 80% of the benefit? It's not hitting tennis balls with your fists, right? It's sparring and heavy bag work, because heavy bag work allows you to fill the gaps that you that come through sparring, because you have to limit your sparring in specific ways in order to not hurt each other all the time.
Yeah.
It's like, that's it. It's like, I'm sure you, like in jiu-jitsu, you could think of this too. It's like if someone was a generalist and wanted to come over and do jiu-jitsu, what aspects of the game should they focus on?
Right, Rafe. So a few weeks ago, I did a post about two of the strongest. It was actually about three, but Joseph from Fighting Monkey was the third. So I'll leave him out of this. But two guys in Philadelphia. One is Judo Mike, Mike Ancona. No lie, Rafe, this was his conditioning. It was like right out of Vision Quest, right? And Steve Maxwell would always train with this guy, and he was a killer.
Yeah.
He was a killer. Put a log on his back, walk up a hill, do Hindu push-ups and pull-ups, walk down the hill, sprint up the hill, Hindu push-ups, pull-ups, walk down the hill, carry the log back up. He was a killer.
Yeah.
Nothing technical. The other guy, this is his workout, and his technique sucks. His form sucks. He just does 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, 100 push-ups, and 100 pull-ups. And I guarantee you, if you were to grapple with him, you may have actually met him. I don't want to mention names too much, but when you were in Philadelphia, you were probably in the same room as him when you trained with Josh.
Sure.
But I'm telling you, you tie up with him. But this is the beauty, I think, of what you're getting at, Rafe. That's an abbreviated program, 100 reps of 4 body weight movements, but that allows him to spend 5 to 6 hours on the mat because he's not doing complicated shit like punching tennis balls off of some weird bouncy thing on their helmets, right?
Or just in general. So like when I look at the rope, that's my question, is like, is this one of those 20% tools? And maybe it's a tool that, like, not everything has to be one of the 20% tools. Maybe it's a tool that has a very specific application. It's like a sophisticated, intelligent mover can put this in place because it's one way to access something. That's how I feel about the Fighting Monkey ball. Like, it's not a necessary tool, but it works really well because there's a lot of things that you can do with it that allow you to work on agility, evasion, and mobility. And there's lots of ways that you can play with the tool that allow you to dig into those things. But my critique of it is you don't evade tennis balls, right? So if you want the qualities that are being cultivated by that tool to be transferable, you need to go do something with it. Like, I think I've improved my head movement as a martial artist a lot through using that tennis ball, but I don't stop at the tennis ball. Like, I feel like if I just dodged a tennis ball, the transfer to my martial arts would be minimal. But it's the fact that I'm going in there and mapping it really specifically to how I want to be able to fight, and then going and immediately doing drills that are more specific, right? So a lot of times if I do some Fighting Monkey practice ball, what I'll do immediately afterwards is offense, defense, where I'm just working on my head movement with somebody actually trying to hit me, right?
Yes.
And so then I get a much better transfer training effect, I believe. And so that's the kind of the question that I have about this rope is like, okay, I see a lot of people I like who are getting something that they like out of it, but I'm just like, okay, well, what? So it's low impact and it allows you to play with flow. But I mean, that could be a hula hoop, that could be spinning poi, it could be, mace bells, like.
Let me just say a point that I think is important with the rope. I think it appeals to people that don't necessarily, I could be completely wrong with this, Rafe, but I think it appeals to people that don't necessarily like exercise. And by exercise, I mean 3 sets of 10. I think it's for people that like to express themselves physically and still get a workout on the side, right? But that's the byproduct. I think it's for people that like to feel the movements and feel artistic and express themselves physically beyond. For me, it doesn't feel like exercise. For me, it doesn't feel like training at all. For me, it's just like fun. And I think that's the appeal for some people, right?
It's like juggling or another skill base, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Like, I mean, and I wrote an Instagram post about this where I was like, I hate exercising, right?
I hate it too. I can't do it.
It's like I love to move. Right. And I like the way that I think of, so I
I'm
have
so
my
glad
own.
you said that, by the way, Rafe. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, because I'm not alone. And people think, and if you're in our field, people are
Yeah.
like, "What?"
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. I think it's totally unnatural. I think it's crazy, right?
Do you know Tom Montjoy?
I do not.
He's another guy in our kind of spectrum. Primal Movers on Instagram. He went, and he's actually an anthropologist. He does masters, and he went to one of the Pacific Islands, and he had his kettlebell, and he had his pull-up bar, and he ran, and the natives just were like, what is this madman doing? Like, why would you climb a tree when you weren't going up to get coconuts, right?
Right.
Like, who goes for a swim when you're not trying to catch fish? Like, what are you doing?
Right.
And I think that's much more representative of the natural state. But the way that I think about it is that I kind of divide things into, let's say, movement or play. Maybe play is a better way to say it. There's play, there is practice, and there's exercise. So play you do for the intrinsic enjoyment of it.
Yes.
Practice you do because it cultivates skills that give you something that you can access in your play, right? And then maybe we could add training as cultivating physical qualities that are specific to what you want to do in training. But for me, exercise is it's just a thing that people do in order to get sweaty and feel sore.
Yeah.
And if you're not physically active in any other way, I think that's great. Like, awesome, go exercise. And there's a lot of people who do get some kind of joy out of it. You're going to get maybe some endorphins, some runner's high. Maybe if you're doing like a CrossFit or a foot wall or a Zumba class, you're getting all this social connection and ritual that's going on that's really valuable. But like, I'm spending my physical resources in order to cultivate skills and in order to cultivate qualities that support those skills. And anything that just makes me sweaty, that makes me sore, that's not taking me in a specific direction, that's like gambling to me. Like, it's just wasting money.
Yeah,
right?
I'm with you. I totally agree with you. I was listening to Laird Hamilton speak the other day. I think it was actually on the Joe Rogan podcast. And, he's a surfer and he's in the water all day long. And Joe asked him about swimming.
Yeah.
Like, I hate swimming. Who swims for exercise? Who does that? No, you swim for pleasure, right? You swim because it's delicious to freaking swim in the ocean in cold water and those beautiful Washington creeks and stuff, right? Who's out there doing this? Unless you're going to be a competitive swimmer. Who wants to go through that drudgery, right?
Yeah.
Now here's a beautiful athlete, a beautiful surfer, great at expressing himself. And he's like, I hate that. Why would you do that to yourself? Right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not everybody. Maybe somebody else. Like that's
God bless
zen,
people
right?
that can do it. Right. Yeah. God bless the people that can do it. Rafe, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this term. It's a term in Portuguese. It's called pelada. Have you heard this term?
I have heard this term. Yeah. Actually, I have a funny story about that, but go ahead.
So it literally in Portuguese, it means naked. Like it literally means naked, the word pelada. But I think our English translation in this context, at least, would be like spontaneous play or spontaneous practice. And I think, as you were mentioning, skill development, there's tons of research in the cultures of Brazil, right? So the futsal, I'm sure you're familiar with futsal. It's soccer played in, so Brazilians abbreviate everything, right? So futsal is foot. But football is football. Soccer is football, right? So they take foot and futsal, and then sol, which is salon, which is Portuguese for room. So they play soccer on a smaller field.
Yeah. Okay. Small side soccer, basically.
Yeah, perfect. They're actually doing something similar in lacrosse. One of my sons plays lacrosse now, and they call it zip lacrosse. So it's basically three on three, but the fields are much smaller, so they get more play time.
Yeah. Yep.
And there's tons of research on this now coming out of Brazil on that pelada and on the futsal that Australians have a great term for it also. Instead of just practice, they use the term play practice. And they don't do, to use your word from a few with Matt Thornton, dead patterns. They have removed the agility cones. They have removed this. And what they do is they just play these beautifully enjoyable, small-sided games with one another, and that develops all the qualities that these kids need, right?
Yeah.
And in Brazil, they play these pelada games. It's literally the kids are shoeless,
Yep.
playing in some junkyard with, my wife is Brazilian, so she's like, there's broken glass everywhere. There's a scrap metal yard right next to it. There's an aggressive pit bull in the yard right next to it. And these kids are playing football all day. And that's why they're so good.
Yeah.
Pele, the famous soccer player,
Yep.
he played with a mango. He played with a mango because he couldn't afford a soccer ball, man.
Yeah, people take in those cultures. You see it in Africa as well. They take like plastic bags and rubber bands, and they'll just stack plastic bags inside of each other and then wrap rubber bands around them in order to create a ball that they can play with.
Crazy, right?
So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I just spoke at the Sport Movement Conference put on by Sean Mishka, and I actually cited that paper, the paper, one of the papers on Pelada, which was, I'm trying to remember who all the authors were, but one of the authors was Duarte Arroyo, and he was actually speaking as well. So I'm going to be chatting with him soon, because he's actually getting really interested in the impact of being in nature on skill acquisition, like how the context of being in nature actually impacts skill acquisition in movement. So I'm super interested in that. So that's going to be a fun conversation. So that's so let's talk about natural movement for a second, because I know you are all prepped to tell us about natural movement. So what is the story of natural movement from Jason, the historian of fitness over here?
Oh, I'm not. I'm sort of an amateur historian.
Yeah.
But when you were here, we were talking about someone who uses the brand term natural movement.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Someone.
It's just like it's nothing is new.
Yeah.
Actually, in this book also, Rafe, so it's Reshaping Physical Education. I don't want to mispronounce her first name in German. I'm just going to say Margaret. It looks something like Margaret, and then Stryker.
Mm-hmm.
Reshaping Physical Education, which is awesome. This is 1922.
Yeah.
And she has like 4 chapters written on gravity and natural movement.
Yeah.
Play and natural movement. She actually uses the term, which I really love, but again, this is also trademarked, at least in Portuguese, natural gymnastics.
Yeah.
Right. So she uses those terms as well. And it's vaulting,
mm-hmm.
it's rolling, it's tumbling, it's all of those things that we would see, you do and other natural parkour individuals do as well. But written in 1922, she uses these beautiful terms like natural movement and natural gymnastics.
Yeah. I picked up that book based on your reading. What's interesting about the book is she talks a lot about, this idea of what it is to be natural. And, she has an interesting description of that, like harmony in the body.
Yes.
That's part of what we're seeking, is this sort of harmonious development of the body, and how she's advocating that essentially she's advocating for a generalist development, right? And that's not, so again, it's more like game-based training, less drill-based, less specific calisthenics type base, and more of a like make sure kids are running around in the woods and doing skiing. She talks about skiing, swimming, all that stuff. But also interestingly, I think some of the ideas there kind of anticipate the constraints-led approach and the like ecological dynamics ideas, because she talks a lot about how we don't know why a student isn't organizing the way that we want them to. And that often if we just let them move long enough, they'll figure it out.
Yes.
And she also talks about the idea of part practice versus whole practice, with the idea being that generally we're going to get better development through whole practices rather than part practices. And so it's really, I think it's for anyone who's interested in these ideas, it's really worth going back and taking a look at that book, because it anticipates a lot about kind of some of the trends that I think are happening within thinking about movement and fitness right now.
Yeah. So in preparation for speaking with you, Rafe, I went back and looked at some of my highlights, and I'm sure this happens to you as well. You highlight stuff and then you go back and read the book like 10 years later and you're like, wow, So she said physical education should really be called, I'm not sure if this will resonate with you as much as it did with me this morning, but physical education should really be called applied biology.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
was like, that's deep, man. That's
Yeah.
really good. We use the word applied kinesiology all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but applied biology takes it to a whole nother level, right?
Yeah.
Because kinesiology, yes, it's the study of human movement, biology, but bio is all of us. It's the whole spectrum of life, which
Mm-hmm.
that's why we move. If you ask me, it's because we want to be a complete person, not just a mover. We want to apply this movement to make us whole in other ways as well.
Yeah. Something that Ida said that I think is really brilliant is you're a human first, a mover second,
Yes.
a
Who
specialist
said
third.
that? Who
Ido.
said that?
Ido
Oh,
Portal.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was like, that one's great.
Yeah.
So we got to nest the way we think about movement within how we understand human nature. And like I wrote an article called Conceptualizing Fitness Evolutionarily back in 2011. And, I started with that quote from Dobzhansky: nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution. And that's essentially the founding idea of Evolve, Move, Play, is that the fitness industry is a form of applied biology, but it hasn't experienced the Darwinian revolution. Right? It's still in this mechanistic worldview that's very isolated from understanding the human being in a broader sense. It's like, I actually think that if you want to achieve the goals of the fitness industry, you actually have to understand a little bit about anthropology and evolutionary biology and ethnography and psychology and evolutionary psychology, neurobiology, like all that stuff actually is important. And even philosophy, which, now we're asking our physical culturalists to become extremely highly educated people. But given that our culture is dying physically,
yes,
maybe we need that.
I agree. I totally feel we need it, Rafe, but I'm not sure if you feel the same type of, I don't know what the word would be, depression. You have this vision of what the physical educator should be.
Yeah.
I share a very similar vision. I have a vision of what I think a physical educator should be and present and teach and all that. But then I have neighbors, Rafe. I'm not sure if you remember my neighborhood. I live 2 blocks away from the elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
I have parents that drive their children to the elementary school. It's a very safe neighborhood. All the neighbors look out for everyone else's children.
Yeah.
But they drive their children. So I think what happens to people like you and me and the people that we want to coach and develop into physical educators is we meet this resistance with, I don't want to shame anybody in particular, but our general population is just really difficult to reach.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the question people always ask me, right? Is, how do I convince my mom to do this?
Right.
And my answer is you don't, honestly, because I don't think that that's actually the right. I think that you have to destroy the thing in order to make it palatable to the general populace. And that's not actually, like, once it's been digested to the point that it's saleable to the soccer moms at Whole Foods, it's not the thing that it was supposed to be anymore.
Yeah. Look at yoga.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I have this model.
Yeah.
Which is basically that real social changes don't start by trying to build an avatar of the 50th percentile, right? Or the median, and trying to sort of build your approach based off of it. It starts by saying, this is what we think is true. And we're going to articulate it so well and so beautifully that the people who are almost where we are going to adopt it. And then they're going to articulate it and think about it in a new way. They're going to contribute to that understanding, which is going to convert that. So it's like, okay, maybe you're at the total edge of the
the wave of diffusion of innovation, right? You're the edge case for the diffusion of innovation. It's like, well, your job isn't, if you're in the 10th% of people who understand movement and fitness, your job isn't to convert the people who are at the 50th percentile. It's just to convert the people who are
at 11
percentile.
Yeah.
And their job is to convert the next 10% for you. I
Yes.
think that's how it works.
See, that's great point, Rafe. I love our conversations. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
That's why I actually prefer working with other professionals. Because if I work with one, I'm just going to use the word general pop, right? If I work with one client, I have affected one client. If I work with one professional and have an impact on that professional, hopefully that professional can go out and have an impact on 50 clients, 100 clients, right? So, yeah. Going back to simplicity, we didn't really talk about simplicity, but I think when you brought up your mom, I think that's one thing also that we do a disservice to is we try to come up with these complicated or complex systems, right? Where all my mom needs to do is squat well so she can function in her day-to-day life and probably go for a walk.
Yeah. That's,
right.
So I have this beautiful vision of movement, and I'm got people jumping through trees and, jumping off waterfalls and climbing. And people always ask me like, okay, well, where do you start? Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's really simple. Like, go for a walk in nature. That's the number one thing. That's the number one thing.
First thing.
Yeah. Learn to like practice a little bit of breathing. That's my second thing. It's just, you don't have to sit down and meditate for 10 minutes. Just like learn the difference between, stressful breath and non-stressful breath so that you can tune out and let go of the world.
And you can do that during your walk, man.
Yeah, exactly.
You can do it together, right?
Yeah. And then the next thing is like, get people spending some time on the ground. That's it. Like it could be an animal flow class or, a contemporary dance class or a b-boy class, right? Or it can just be literally move your chairs out of a room and do what you need to do while you're on the ground. Or garden, right? Garden,
huge. Dance.
Yeah.
I remember growing up, I grew up in Appalachia, and there was it's actually a little bit sad that they don't do this anymore. But I remember this World War II generation.
Yeah.
They would have these huge festivals, and my great-grandparents and grandparents would do these old Slavic dances, and everybody was having a great time, right? But now, unless it's in a dance club, nobody's dancing. That's one reason why I love the coordinations that Fighting Monkey does, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be any type of formal dance, right?
Have you ever heard me tell my story?
I've heard many stories, Rafe.
Sorry.
Is this a dance
about
story?
Appalachia, the Appalachian experience? You've heard me talk about that because it's really interesting what you just said.
I don't think so. Please educate me.
So when
hopefully it's a good one because you could have some pretty rough ones.
It's rough. It's depressing, but also, I think it picks up on this theme. But quick and dirty version of it is when I was 8 years old, we had a man move into our property who became my mentor and took over my education. And he was from a tiny little town right in the corner between North Carolina, West Virginia, and Virginia. So he's on the Virginia side of that, but it's called Staffordsville, which is named after his family.
Okay.
Used to be called the Irish Settlement. And he grew up in Staffordsville. And he took me out to visit there. And I met his grandfather and his grandfather's 4 brothers. And these 4 brothers had been the son of the traveling doctor and pastor for that region. And then they all formed a bluegrass band and toured the country playing bluegrass. And then they all
This is a great story already, man.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And then they all served in World War II, right?
Okay.
And so I'd been told about this idea of elders as like bearers of culture and wisdom. And I'd never felt like I'd experienced it. And like most Americans, I had this, very negative perception of people from Appalachia as kind of rednecks and uneducated.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so I arrive and I meet these guys and like we drive up this dirt road and we arrive at their house, and it's a stick built house that Sean's grandfather built by hand. Right. And they make this feast, and there's literally like ham that is from a pig that somebody raised, that somebody killed, that somebody cured in that family. There's trout from a local stream. They make fry bread, and they like one of his aunts takes me out and we harvest sarsaparilla root and bring it back to make tea.
Look at that.
Right? And I was so impressed. And then before we had the meal, I don't know why, but I can't remember his grandfather's name right now. But he stands up and he just quotes extemporaneously from the Bible for like 20 minutes, which was pretty brutal. But it was like the level of depth of his understanding of the culture that he was within was so extreme. And so then they all brought out, the old generation brought out music. So they played accordions and guitars and fiddles.
Yeah.
And these guys, like every one of these guys, right? Like, Heinlein's specialization is for insects, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I've got a human being should be able to butcher a hog.
I thought that was Greg Glassman, man. That wasn't Greg Glassman?
No, it wasn't. So butcher a hog, plan an invasion, program a computer, play music, like everything, right? It's like, these are the closest people that I've ever come to experiencing that, where it's like they were culture bearers. Like they knew how to take care of someone who's injured. They knew local medicines. They knew what was in the forest there, what was available to them. They knew how to hunt. They knew how to farm. They knew how to raise livestock. They could fight. They were incredible wells of traditional music and so like that's actually like key to my whole conception of what we're trying to do, because I think like the idea of movement culture, I think, is such a beautiful idea, but it's like movement culture is just one of the aspects of our culture that we've been decultured from.
Decultured, good term. Yeah.
Right. We've been decultured from music. Right.
Yes.
We've been I make this joke.
And it's been taken away from us as it, right?
Yeah.
And this is what has happened with the exercise. And I consider my mentor, Frank. Frank has always talked about this. We have taken, I'll just use the word movement. We have taken movement out of our own hands.
Yep.
And put it into the hands of an expert class. Mm-hmm. Right. And we have done the same thing exactly with music.
Yeah.
It's like,
right? No, it's like we don't make food anymore. We leave that.
We don't make food, so somebody. Yeah, right.
Yeah, we don't play music anymore. We leave that to professionals. We don't dance anymore. We leave that to professionals. Like crafts, literally, we don't even have sex anymore. We leave that to professionals, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm not even kidding. Like that's a joke, but it's actually true on some level. Like the rate at which people initiate new sexual relationships or have sex in the relationships they're in is on a steady decline, while the rate of porn consumption is going steadily up. Like we're literally losing access to the most like the thing that propagates the species.
It's crazy, man.
Like that's how disembodied we are as a culture.
So Rafe, there's a channel on YouTube called Soft White Underbelly. Have you seen this?
No, I haven't.
The guys, I don't know him personally. He sounds a little bit obnoxious to me when he's interviewing these people from Appalachia. I say Appalachia, you say Appalachia, right? But
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it goes both ways. I'm from Pennsylvania, the gold region in Pennsylvania. So our pronunciation is probably a little bit different.
Appalachia, I think.
Appalachia, yes.
Yeah.
These people have nothing. And it's exactly like nothing material, I should say.
Yeah.
It's exactly how you described your situation, right? Mm-hmm. But when this interviewer, and I'll send you some links, have you ever thought about leaving? No, I have everything I need right here. Are you happy? I couldn't be happier. The mountains called me. I love the mountains. And they're living in a trailer with the pigs outside with no running water. They got to walk to the creek across this, or as we would say, crick. You got to walk to the creek to get the fresh water to take a bath in, right? Some didn't have electricity until recent years. but they were all super happy. You know why? Because they had family. And I attribute it a lot to actually working with our hands, right?
Yep.
That's something that has been taken away. We have been decultured.
Yeah.
They have taken away this so much. So my wife and I disagree on a few things educationally about the sons, but in Pennsylvania, we have 2 or 3 really, really good technical schools.
Yeah.
Right. And it's all about this.
Yep.
It's all about the hands. And one of the taglines of the school is a future built by hand. And it's trying to take the education and put it back here. Right. And I always use my art teachers as an example. And when we were doing a tour of the local art school, technical school, rather, I'm sorry, you know, they had auto body and all that stuff. The art teacher, they could all remember the names of their students.
That's beautiful.
Like that. The art teacher was like, Sandra did the pamphlets for the elementary school in 1997, knew it, could talk about it. And I think it's because they worked hand in hand with their students, and they actually created something tangible at the end of their work day, their school days, as opposed to in 1917, Bismarck did this, right? The stuff that floats around in outer space and it just in here and out there and nobody cares, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great term, Ray. If we take our hands have been taken away from us. I don't know if we will really want it back. I bet that the large percentage of our population would not want it back. But music has been taken, art, craft. Think about what our grandparents used to do. Sew, crochet. Man, I still have the Afghans that my grandparents made for us. I still have pillows that they made by hand.
Yeah. I in 2016, I started thinking about this idea of the self-worth esteeming. And this was part of like, you know, my sort of meditation on these Appalachian elders that I had met. But I thought that fundamentally the self-esteem movement was mistaken and that it wasn't working for what it was trying to do, right? That the problem wasn't that people weren't told to love themselves. The problem was that people had all of the aspects of the self that gave a sense of meaning or a sense of self-worth stripped out of them.
That's great. That's a great observation.
Yeah. So it was like, do you even lift, bro? Right.
Right.
Like I think our culture is really like, it's been collapsed into these 2 points, which are how much do you earn and how much do people want to have sex with you? Like those are the 2 points of value upon which someone can rate themselves, because, and I think this is actually a function of capitalism, which is not like a critique of which is not to say that capitalism is evil and we need communism or socialism. It's just to say that as a system without some checks and balances, it's not actually optimized to human well-being. It optimizes for the production of capital.
Right.
And so the thing about it is that capital is very dependent on comparative advantage. So if there's one thing that I do 1% better than you, then it's better for me to spend all my time on that so that we can trade. And then the total production of goods is increased, which has some amazing effects, right? We live in a world that's more affluent than any world that's ever existed before us. But the problem is that if you spend all of your time on one thing, then you just you're like a monocrop, right? You're like soil that's depleted as you produce just soybeans. And that's just not what you were evolved for. And if you're in a tribal circumstance, like everybody finds a way to sort of be a contributing member of that community. They find the thing that they are good at. So maybe you're not the dominant, hunter in the village, but maybe you are the best singer, or maybe you're the best musician, or maybe you know where to find the fish, right? Like all those things become sources of self-worth. So if I think about those old Appalachian guys, it's like they had lots of sources of self-worth. I think that we are losing out on those. And so right after that,
I found Jordan Peterson, and I was like, okay, this guy is like, he's speaking to what I'm talking about. But as much as I love him, I feel like he doesn't fully get the hand part, right? He talks about the aspects of the heroic self. And in his book, he talks about the motor homunculus, right?
Yeah.
Talks about the aspect of the tongue and the capacity to articulate things. It's like vision, tongue, and hands. Like these are the things that are so massively represented in the brain.
Yeah.
And so you have a description now of how we can really focus on articulating ourselves and how we can attend to problems and how we're going to do this. But where is the aspect of how we bring this into the body, how we cultivate a virtue that's in it? And it's like, it's the whole body, but the hand is like representational of the whole body because it's the thing that best represents the dexterity of the human being.
Yeah, true. That's Rafe. So many things to talk about, man. So it's interesting that you brought up capitalism because I was going to discuss, I'm sure you've seen these two terms compared, consumerism versus
capitalism. Yeah.
No. Yes.
Consumerism.
And
well,
producerism. Producerism.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you use the word capitalism, but capitalism to me sounds a lot like consumerism. Mm-hmm. And the two examples you brought up, money, which is our ability to consume, right? Mm-hmm. And sex, the ability to consume pleasure from someone else, right? Yeah. And we have shifted from a culture of producerism, right, into all we do is consume all day. Mm-hmm. We just consume passively all day. Yeah. And I forget where I heard about this. I think it was actually The Art of Manliness. He had somebody on his podcast, and he said many indigenous and tribal cultures, the mark of manhood is when you stop consuming. Yeah. And you start producing.
A net producer for society.
Yeah. You're a producer. You're no longer consuming. You're no longer on your mother's breast milk. You're producing the crops as opposed to just taking the crops. I thought that was pretty deep.
Yeah. I mean, that's right at the heart of Peterson's message, right? Which is that meaning in life doesn't come from what you can get. It comes from what you take responsibility for.
I love it. Yeah. And the other thing, I know you're good with languages, but I'm going to have to do a video or something on this. Do you know how do you say learn in Spanish?
Oh.
So what's our word so let's take our English word apprentice. That's study. Yeah. That's study. So take our word apprentice.
Yeah.
Right?
Aprendido?
Yeah. Aprendar. It's the same in Portuguese, aprender, which is related to our English word apprentice. Mm-hmm. But when the cops arrest somebody and they take them by hand, apprehend. Yes, they're all related. Mm-hmm. So the Latin-based words for learn are literally take by hand, aprender. Yo necesito aprender más español. I need to learn more Spanish, right?
Yeah.
I think it's so cool that the Latin-based languages, their word for learn is literally by hand.
Yeah. I mean, it's throughout.
Is by hand. Yeah, it's throughout, right?
Like if you look at, in English, we say to understand something, right? That means to stand under it. Right. It's a physical, right? Or if I say like,
understand.
If I'm trying to explain something to you and I want to know if you get it, I ask, did you catch what I was trying to tell you?
Yeah. It's so much.
Grasp it. Can I, I'm having trouble grasping this concept.
Yeah.
What is that?
I can't hold on. Yeah.
So this is, I don't know if you've been paying attention to my conversations with John Vervaeke, but we talk about this stuff quite a bit, right? Like within the cognitive science, there's this deepening understanding that cognition is utterly dependent on motor control, right? So the way that we think is one of the best ways to understand what thinking actually is that it's like modeling out motor actions in a simulation.
That's deep.
Right?
I'm just keep talking. I'm just picturing this.
Yeah. So like there's another Jordan Peterson point that I like too, because it ties into this. He says, you think, and I think this is actually maybe Whitehead who said this, but he said, you think so that your thoughts may die instead of you. So if you imagine that, you're a mosquito produces thousands of offspring and most of them fail, right? But what a human being does is it imagines out thousands of actions, of potential action pathways, and it selects from among them. So we run a Darwinian process basically on actions before we get to them. And that's basically what thinking is. And so what we're doing when we're thinking is we are actually in the way that we think, and if you dig deep into it, you'll find it over and over again at every level. It's metaphor, and it's referring back to our capacity to interact with the world around us. And so as we become less and less connected to that interaction, it's like we're actually cutting off the source from which our cognition arises.
I like that.
So, John Vervaeke, he's the director of cognitive science at the University of Toronto, and along with Peterson, the two of them were voted the most life-changing professors at the University of Toronto. Like it was back and forth between the two of them for decades, I guess. And so I've had the chance to talk with him a lot, and he gave a talk for the summit that we did, the Embodied Movement Summit last summer, about basically how the embodiment revolution and the mindfulness revolution are happening together, and they're happening at the same time for a reason, because they're necessary in order to recover from what he calls the meaning crisis. And he talks about these 4 P's of knowing, right? And those are propositional knowing, which is essentially logical and semantic representations of things, right? And then procedural knowing, which is an embodied capacity to do something. And then perspectival is kind of seeing the world through the perspective of someone who has these capacities. Or maybe you could think of it as not just knowing how to do the thing, but knowing when and where to do the thing. And then participatory knowing would be something like knowing by being, that the way in which you're reciprocally changed by being engaged in some process. So one way that I think about this is like, you could tell someone that a mother should breastfeed their child, right? When the child cries, an infant. And that's a rule. But you don't actually know how to breastfeed, how to get a latch, how to do all these things until you actually do it, right? Turns out that it's not that easy.
No.
All right. So then there's a procedure, right? But then there's the knowledge that like every woman has of what it's like to hear the cry of a child that is specifically telling you that it's hungry, or their children, right?
Yeah.
And then what it's like to feel your milk let down and all those things. Like that's perspectival. And then there's a relationship you have with that individual child that changes you, right? You're a different person because you've experienced it with that child. So that's those layers. And like I think about it like I'll give you another example, maybe because my son's playing rugby right now. So so you might tell somebody, okay, when you see a lane open, you need to cut back to go into that lane, right? So that's a rule, right? That's a proposition. I've told you a rule for how you should behave. And then there's like having the physical ability to do the cut, right? Like, what does it feel like to cut? What position should my body be in? And then there's the perceptual acuity for when lanes actually open. Does that make sense?
Yep. And
then there's like, who have I become through playing rugby? What does it mean to me? How has it changed me?
Right.
And what's the sort of the shadow side of science, you might say, is that science allows us to collect propositions, and those propositions can be very, very
powerful in manipulating the world, but they don't necessarily empower the individual, and they don't give you a sense of meaning in life. Knowing the rules, it's like reading the menu and not eating the meal.
Or knowing that extra or movement is good for you and not actually doing any of it, right?
yeah.
Right.
Yep.
We all know we should move, but we don't move, right? We drive to the elementary school 2 blocks away.
Yeah, it's like going on CrossFit main site, reading the WOD, and then being done. Okay, right. I read it.
Yeah, I read it. That's enough for me today.
That's enough. So I think that this is really at the heart of what I think you're interested in as well right now, is getting people back into embodiment, back into the sense that there's something more than just, being able to know how many calories to eat in order to achieve a certain body composition, or going through perfect technique on your kettlebell swing.
Right. Yeah.
Right. That's procedural, right? Once you actually have it in your body, it's procedural, but it's still not that deep.
It's not deep at all. Right.
And so I was listening to one of your interviews in preparation for this, and you're talking about like the problem you want to solve in the fitness world is the problem of depth.
Yeah. That's a great question, right?
Yeah.
What's the one problem you want to solve?
Yeah.
In depth. And depth, I think, goes back to everything that you were just speaking about.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have any depth because everything has been taken away from us.
Yeah. Well,
or everything of what was your term? Self-worth.
Mm-hmm.
Was it self-worth? Everything that provides us with self-worth has been taken away from us.
Yeah. Or we've given it away.
Or voluntarily given it away for something else, right?
Because, it's amazing that we can listen to the most talented musicians that maybe have ever existed in human history, right? Like by just opening our phone.
It's incredible.
We can, and not only that, like we can listen to people who are like tuned to our specific tastes in a way that's like never existed in the past. This is kind of a random tangent, but I think this is interesting. I think that people who grow up in the aughts and the 20s, they're not going to have the sense of the song of their time the same way that we did, right? Like because you don't listen to the radio, right? Like kids listen, like you can easily self-select into listening to like this incredibly small genre of goth, emo, industrial punk, and there's like 5,000 other people on the internet who absolutely love it, and all you listen to is that, right? It's like I listen to a lot of Americana music that like nobody else knows about, right? Like I couldn't sing a bar of WAP if my life depended on it.
I don't even know who WAP is.
WAP was the most popular song on the radio in 2020. It stands for Wet Ass Pussy.
Yeah, I don't even know what that is. I'm glad I don't know what that is.
No. Popular culture has taken a deep dive now that it doesn't have to serve so many different subcultures, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. So that's just an interesting tangent, but you can see this as like really beautiful in a certain way, that we have this capacity. It's like, I got really into Chris Stapleton recently. You know who Chris Stapleton is?
No, sir. Okay.
He's a country Western artist who, his most famous song is called Strawberry Wine.
Okay.
And it's basically just to the tune of At Last by Etta James. Or no, it's to the tune of I'd Rather Go Blind by Etta James.
Okay.
Right. So you have this country Western artist who's actually like really, really deeply influenced by soul. So like he clearly studied a lot of Al Green, a lot of Otis Redding, right? So he plays with his voice in a way that's very atypical for country western. So I love soul music and I love country western. So I found Chris Stapleton. I was like, oh my God, this is the stuff.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, who else has done this? So I like started looking, and I was like, I couldn't find anyone. And then I found this one artist, Charlie Crockett. And he's literally made albums that are country western albums and made albums that are like rhythm and blues, soul albums. And I was like, oh man, this is my jam. I'm listening to nothing but Charlie Crockett for a month.
Right.
And like nobody else knows who this guy is.
No.
Right.
At least in your world, there's probably a cult out there that's a Charlie Crockett cult someplace, right?
There is. So that's cool. But on the other hand, like there's music is so deeply representative of tribe. Like it is like one of the most powerful signals. And when you don't have music and you don't have pop culture and you don't have stories that are held in common between people, it's like you're cutting away all the common ground.
Yeah. That's just to use my example of the festivals in my old town. It brought the whole town together. It brought the whole town together. And that would never happen in my little suburban town now.
No.
Ever.
No,
and there's zero. I'm going to sound like an old grouchy guy here, but there's absolutely zero depth in most modern music
and pop culture too.
Yeah, it's like, look at my ass, look at my ass, look at my ass. Who cares, right? So I don't know if you like John Cougar Mellencamp, but I say, look at these lyrics. Just listen to these lyrics. He's talking about walking along the fence of his grandfather's farm, hand in hand, and how the farms are being taken away.
Yeah.
That's a motto. Hold on to 16 as long as you can. Changes will come around real soon, make us women. And then Jack and Diane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now compare that with, I don't even know. What was it? WAP?
Yeah. WAP. Cardi B, WAP. Seriously. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I like country western music, is because I feel like it's very much a storytelling. Depth. It's very much a storytelling genre. It's like you'll hear a wider variety of stories.
My dog died, right? My woman left me on Tuesday, that type of stuff. That's also cliche.
There's that, but it's like, one of my favorite songs recently is a song about, it's called Keeping the Wolves Away, my Uncle Lucius.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's about,
I watched that video on YouTube. Yep.
Yeah. He's talking about how his father, was injured in a accident in an oil refinery, and how he worked through overcoming these injuries so he could keep food on his children's table. And then now it's his job to do the same thing for his dad, as he's, that type of stuff is more meaningful to me. Right now.
Totally. It's more meaningful to the human animal, I believe, as well. Right.
It's interesting though, because I'm told it doesn't work for me for whatever reason, but I'm told there's actually a lot of really powerful storytelling in hip hop. Right. So there's the super popular stuff that's not really there.
I don't buy it. Maybe it's because we're, not to bring race to it too much, but maybe it's because we're straight white males.
Yeah, maybe straight white cisgendered males.
And we don't have the same struggles as maybe 50 Cent or who just passed away.
There's different parts of hip hop. Like there's a beautiful breakdown of the song "Hey Ya" by Outkast.
Yes.
Right. "Hey Ya" is a really interesting song.
So Outkast is talented, and they are good storytellers, I think.
Yeah. So the song "Hey Ya" is really interesting because it's very meta, right? Because he puts together this very upbeat, very like danceable song, and then he tells this very sad. He tells this very sad story about how we're unable to keep relationships together, and then he tells the audience, "You're not listening to me because you just want to dance." Right. Mm-hmm. So like the lyrics are talking about one thing, the music is taking you in another direction, and then he's pointing out that you as the audience aren't actually paying attention to the lyrics.
That's cool. I'm gonna have to pay more attention to that song.
Right. Yeah. So that's a cool
Miss
song.
Jackson is a great song.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's a beautiful
great story.
Song. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's Kendrick Lamar. People really love him. I don't enjoy the sound of his voice, but someone was pointing out this song Royalty. The lyrics of it are basically about how you have the entire depth of human experience within you, right? I've got betrayal in my DNA. I've got all these things in my DNA. And so like a lot of rap is just sort of like the rap that I grew up with is very much like, I call it alpha male posturing music.
Yes.
And I love it to lift heavy weights too. I broke like every deadlift record I ever broke to DMX, right?
Yeah, DMX is good.
But there are other layers to it, right? So, and I can't speak to it, but the way that story was broke down, if you look at the lyrics of Royalty by Kendrick Lamar, you get this deeper level of storytelling as well. But yeah, I think to move on from that, I think that you see it also in like movies, like all the Avengers movies, all the superhero movies, like they're all.
I don't know how you feel about that, man, but we don't need another superhero movie.
No, we don't.
Please stop with that stuff, man. Please stop, right?
I remember
another Hulk movie? Seriously?
I remember being like 16 years old and like it was like, I was interested in Star Wars and I was interested in the Lord of the Rings and I was interested in X-Men. And it was like, all of a sudden, all the stuff that we had hoped would be like, why aren't these things made into movies? It was like, they all started coming out. And I was like, so exciting. And then a lot of them turned out to not be very good. And I was like, oh, well, actually the books are better anyways. But we hit this point where I hit this point a few years ago. I was like, I don't want to ever watch another superhero film. Like I don't go. And I have an 8-year-old. My wife will take him to the movies with another couple and I don't go. Yeah. For me, The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan, Batman, that's the last one that we ever needed. It fulfilled the genre for me. I mean, I'm sure they could make another good one. Apparently Logan was good. Joker was interesting. Joker was very interesting. It's not a superhero movie, but it's from the universe. But my point in that is just that it's another place where it feels like our culture is sacrificing depth. Mm-hmm. We're not trying to tell interesting stories anymore.
No, they just want to make their millions with a summer movie and move on until 2022, 2023, right? Mm-hmm. At least that's the way I get it.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it for sure. So after the diatribe on pop culture, what does it mean to you to pursue depth in physical culture?
That's a great question. So I think depth could be unique to everyone as an individual. Mm-hmm. I was actually thinking about doing this. I know you like words and I really like words and I was going to do a video on this word authentic. Mm-hmm. And the word author. So author and authentic is the same root, right?
Yeah.
And to answer your question about depth is, I think we need to be authentic with our own approach to human movement. For example, in the fitness industry, let's go back to walking. You and I started this conversation about walking. Mm-hmm. To me personally, there is nothing deeper than a walk in nature.
Yeah.
Evolutionarily speaking, just I don't think there's anything deeper. The information I get from this world, from the outside world, my interior world, it's all there. And I think humans were made to walk much more than we were made to run, or much more than we were made to do anything else, really. And I think it's to answer your question about depth is, I think we have to do a good little job of finding out. Well, it's a great question. I think we have to do or have to find what is deep to us, mm-hmm. and not what is deep to that expert class of individuals, just to reach some other metric that may or may not actually be important to us. They may be important for some type of health outcome, But if in terms of talking about the person, Rafe, for the person, Jason, that spark that's inside the body and not the cholesterol, I think we have to put that expression back into our hands and take it out of the expert class. And to me, that is deep. Like grappling.
Yeah.
I'll grapple all day. Walking, I'll walk all day. Swimming for pleasure, I'll swim all day. Have me do a WOD. There's no depth in WODs for me. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that there's no depth in a WOD for someone else.
Yeah.
Right? And that person that loves those WODs would find walking probably boring.
Maybe.
I
mean, I don't know. It's hard to imagine that there's any human being that exposed to walking in nature isn't going to start attuning to the value of it.
I would hope not.
That if you're,
you think
train your attention properly.
I have a 10-year-old that lives on our street. She's afraid to go for walks because mom has sort of brainwashed her into insects.
Oh God! And, but I mean, that's not to say that she can't, though. That's to say that someone that a barrier has been erected.
I'm doing my best, Rafe. I'm doing my best.
I had this realization a few years ago so I started doing parkour, and I grew up in the woods running around, but I started doing parkour, and I actually initially can't imagine how I would do parkour in the woods, but I want to because I want to connect my practice to nature. Mm-hmm. And I asked my friend Dan Iaboni, how do I start doing parkour in nature? And he says, go into the woods, start running, you'll figure it out. So I walked to the woods and
started running.
I found a big fallen Doug fir, and it was on a slope. And so I go down it. And then as I get off the slope, there's all these vine maples, and I jump into the vine maples and start climbing from vine maple to vine maple. And I had done a ton of that exact stuff as a kid. So it was like immediately back to the mind of a child. And I was like, oh, I fell in love with this place. Right. And that's Whatcom Falls, right? I just happened to walk into Whatcom Falls, which is where the climb through the waterfall is that people see in my videos, and the cliff dives and the fallen logs and all this stuff. So it's a rich environment. So now I start training in nature, and then I go to Seattle and I start training in the trees, and I find these amazing trees, and I'm like, well, what are these trees? Because I'm not used to seeing trees that do this. And it turns out they're actually the third most common tree in the Northwest, the Western red cedar. And I'm like, well, why are they like this here and not somewhere else? So then I study up on Western red cedars, and I learned that they what's called crown from the bottom. They shoot out limbs from the bottom if there's sufficient light available. So then, then I know something about Western red cedars. And then over time, I get to know all the trees that I like to move in. And then I get to know something about them and why they form. And it's like, well, it has to do with the sun that's available and the water. And now the mind of a tree almost, or the way of being of a tree, what matters to a tree starts to matter to me. And I start to understand it on a deeper level. And so I start getting this curiosity for nature, and I end up having a panic attack and not being able to train normally. So I'm just walking in nature every day as a replacement for it. I started having the sense that I was blind, that I didn't know what most of the plants in my local area are, or what they provided to the local animals, or how people would traditionally use them. And so I had the sense that the land around me was full of stories, but I couldn't read them.
It's true.
And so I think that most people, when they walk through nature, they see a wall of green, and there's no articulation of what's happening within those. And so I started to think of this as imagining someone who is illiterate walking through the Library of Alexandria.
Yeah.
It's all this stuff is available to you, and you're blind to it. So it doesn't inform you. But if you had the capacity to understand, it would be profound. And the stories that are written into the land are the most fundamental stories, or the stories that we evolved to read. It's writing probably evolves from tracking, right? Our capacity to symbolically represent things is about this capacity to look at the ground
and see
See a
what the
print
meaning
or see,
of a print
yeah.
means. And yeah, and so that started me asking, like, how do I know that better? And I think that someone who knows that, someone who's attuned to that, is going to have a more meaningful experience of walking through nature. So if you take some kid who's 12 years old and who gets to play hyper stimulating video games all the time and is hopped up on sugar and caffeine all the time, and you plop them down in the middle of the woods and say, hey, you know, this should be fun, they're not going to find it fun, right? But that's not because there's something inherent to their personality which prevents them from attuning deeply to nature and finding great value in it. It's because their perceptual system hasn't been attuned to the information. And so
it's been taken away from them.
Yes. Because there's an inherent drive that all children have to interact with nature.
I agree. Yeah. Do you watch Alone, Rafe?
No, people have been telling me to watch this recently. Yeah, lots of people are telling me to watch this.
You know, I try to be a good dad and educate my sons, and just about, you know, broad topics. But season 6, there was this gentleman who killed a wolverine with a machete. He actually ended up he actually ended up winning. So he killed a moose, right? And he did everything that he should have done properly. Like he put the moose up on these big stilts so no other predator could come.
Yeah.
But this wolverine kept like crawling up the thing and eating all of his fat. He's like, I just lost 3,000 calories of fat. I needed that for the winter. Right? So he corners this wolverine and kills the freaking thing with a machete, right?
Wow.
And he wins. I forget what the bounty was at the end of season 6. It was like $500,000 or $1 million, right? But maybe it wasn't a moose. It was something large like that. But he comes home and he tells his wife, I killed a wolverine with a machete. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she smacks him on the chest like, you are a wild man, right? And he's like, oh, shucks. He's so happy and she's so happy and they're elated. And I'm always like, that guy at the end of the day was so happy he killed a wolverine, and his wife was so happy he killed it. He actually ate it. He had the skull right on this little tent. Compared to, and there's people in my life that think I'm a dick because I make these type of comparisons, but compare that with the guy that said, today I sent some emails. Right? This guy was out in nature. He killed a moose with a bow and arrow. Mm-hmm. Right? Lived alone for 6 months above the Arctic Circle. Killed a predator that was stealing his bucket of fat and came home with $1 million, as opposed to, today I sent some emails. Maybe I am a dick. But I bet if we want to go back to that conversation of depth and experience the whole freaking spectrum of being a freaking human, that guy that killed that wolverine is on a whole nother level than the person that's in that incubator all freaking day, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the word that when you're asked that question, like, what's the one word, right? The one word for me is meaning.
Meaning is good. Yeah.
Because fundamentally,
they could actually be synonyms probably at some point.
Yeah, because what I talk about a lot is deep, right? Yeah. I use that word deep all the time, like a deep knowledge of self, deep connection to nature. That word comes up.
I use that word also.
Yeah.
I use that word also. I actually use deep. I'm not sure if you do, but I use deep as a synonym for deliberate.
Interesting. Yeah.
So in my system, I use 4 things. I use deep practice, deep play, deep rest. And the 4th one is deep nature. Yeah. Where some people, my term deep practice is deliberate practice, but deliberate, I don't think that's a very good term. So
depth means that you're, it's hitting you on multiple layers, right? It's like you can listen to a song and you can dance because it's fun and upbeat, or you can listen to a song and it can be like, the world changed for me because of that song. Right. Like there's a song called Mother by Brandy Carlisle.
Oh, Brandy Carlisle. I thought you were saying
Brandy
dancing.
Carlisle. No,
Okay.
no. But it's about the experience of being a mother, right? The first thing that you took from me were selfishness and sleep.
Right there.
Right.
That's a story.
That's the beginning of the song, right? And like
The
every
first
woman
thing you took from me was selfishness and sleep.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Every woman I've shared that with who's had a child has cried.
I'm sure.
Right?
What's the name of it? It's called Mother, and who's the
Brandy
musician?
Carlisle.
Brandy Carlisle. I'll have to look that up.
So like that's a different level of depth, right? It takes you
Totally.
into a perspectival experience of what motherhood is like.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I mean by deep. And I think that depth is something we're looking for. And like fundamentally, I think we're looking for a deep reconnection to ourselves, actually. Like, I think that we are actually blind to a lot of what we are. And we're sort of operating this very shallow interface with the world. And there's all this underlying aspect of the self that's not integrated. And part of that's the body and part of that's the mind, and they're interconnected. So it's like, we think we need a movement practice and a mindfulness practice, and we have to integrate them. We have to see how they interact. And then we need to connect deeply to the natural world, nature connection. We need to connect deeply to other human beings. We need community. It's like, those are the four pillars. So that's where we think you derive meaning from life, is those connections, and then a sense that you're cultivating a self that you would admire, that you're becoming a more heroic version of yourself over time. Mm-hmm. So there's the being in the moment and the thing that you're becoming. And obviously they interact, but that's the model that we've been playing with. So that's, I've lost my question, but that's the idea.
You were just saying your word for depth is meaning.
Yeah.
And I said they were, they could probably be used as a synonym at some point or in some context. Yeah.
So that's fundamentally what I think. I've told John that I think that what's behind Evolve Move Play is essentially it's an effort to reunite philosophia with gymnasia, because
that's great, man.
Yeah. The philosophy began in the gymnasia of ancient Greece. It began with people who are deeply steeped in physical practice. And if we go into the East and we look at Kung Fu and Tai Chi and Sumo, all of these things were deeply connected to Taoist, Zen, Buddhist, Shinto practices. Right.
Who said this, Rafe? That there's more wisdom. So go back to philosophy. Yeah. There's more wisdom in your body than in
all of your philosophers. I think it was Nietzsche.
Nietzsche, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we can't cultivate wisdom. We can't love wisdom if it remains a simply propositional playing with semantics and logic.
Right. Do you know Daniel, the Italian author Daniel Botticelli? I'm probably mispronouncing that. On the Warrior's Path.
No.
He was always on Joe Rogan also. He's a martial artist, but he talks about that. And like the first 4 chapters is about what type of philosophy can I get from a monk that is totally withered away, right?
Yeah.
Like slumped shoulders, fat, whatever, right? No, you need to learn from these people that still have a good, robust physicality to them, right?
Mm-hmm. We want to unite it, right? Where there's lots of beautiful athletes who are terrible people too, right?
Oh, it's totally true. Yeah.
Right.
Let's not deny that.
Right. And then there's Stephen Hawking, right? So if you're,
this is true.
There are more than one path to the top of the mountain, and in my opinion, every transformative practice is also a trap. It's a place in which you can become self-satisfied, or there's a shadow side of it that can take you in the wrong direction. And so it's really in the ecology of practices and having clarity about your why that we can achieve the positive transformation without falling into the traps.
Right.
So it's about time that we need to wrap up for today. It was a wonderful conversation, Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Rafe. Thanks for having me on. Always great talking, my friend.
Absolutely, yeah.
One day we'll have to talk in person. It's been a while. Yeah. One day we'll have to talk in person, move in person.
Yeah, we'll come
Do a
come
little
out.
aliveness training.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So for folks who are interested in learning more about you, want to come to what are you doing? Like, I know you're kind of in flux in between things, but you have a new project you're
Totally
working
in
on?
flux. So my newest thing would be something that I'm calling the physical creative.
Mm-hmm.
If you just Google the physical creative, I would come up, or
Okay.
physicalcreative.com. That is the website. It's also Jason C. Brown .tv, just my website there. And it's about using our physicality, exactly what we were just speaking about, Rafe.
Yeah.
The whole human spectrum, as opposed to exercise.
Mm-hmm.
I could speak about exercise, but it'll be literally about 1% of what we actually do. It's about those 4 elements. I call them the elements of the deep art, right? The elements are practice, play, rest, and nature.
Yeah.
And trying to combine all 4 of those to make a more creative and alive human.
Beautiful.
So,
more creative and alive humans. That's what
I'm
all
trying,
about.
my friend. I'm trying, but sometimes it falls on deaf ears. So that's why I'm glad there's people like you alongside me.
Thank you.
Trying to get our messages out there.
Absolutely. Awesome. So yeah, we'll talk again soon. I hope to see you soon.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hey, you've reached the end of another Evolve, Move, Play podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, if you want to be involved in the conversation, please consider joining us in our new membership subscription so you can get access to question and answers with our live speakers once a month, question and answers with me once a month, and a dedicated forum to discuss everything going on in the podcast, as well as a general discussion of movement on our general movement forums. If you're interested in that, make sure to check out the link below, get signed up, and join a part of our membership community. If you can't join our membership community right now, it's still always helpful if you can like, share, and subscribe, and even hit that bell and get notifications for upcoming Evolve, Move, Play podcasts. But adios for now, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.